Hello everyone, welcome to Mr. Noctory. Today we're going to ancient China. During the time of the Han Dynasty, deep inside the Forbidden City. Well, its earlier version, the Palace of Han. But you're not the emperor, not a general, not even a noble. You are a eunuch, in a dark, smelly, cramped room just big enough to turn around. And the palace rules. No eye contact, no speaking first, no stopping unless summoned. Eunuchs rotate shifts, aren't allowed to sleep, must check the lamps, white blood guard doors. And at night, you hear moans. You remove animal corpses or human ones. Now, before we begin, if you truly feel this is a peaceful corner to hide in during the night, go ahead and like and subscribe. But only if you truly want to. No pressure. Just like the rule in old taverns, you only stay if you need a quiet place. And you know what I love most? Seeing the comments, where you're from, and what time it is. Whether it's New York or Norway, whether it's 1 a.m. or 5, you're still here, and I see you. Now turn off the lights. Turn on a small fan, if you have one. Not for the heat, but for the soft humming sound. You're 13, skinny, small, with bony hands, but your eyes still have a flicker of something that hasn't been crushed. That morning, there's no sun. Your father walks you without a word. The dry clack of wooden sandals on tile is enough to say, your life is turning a corner that no one asked your opinion about. They say being a eunuch means food, silk robes, a place in the palace. But they never say what you trade for it. During the Western Han, some villages were so starved, parents brought their sons to the palace with a faint hope. Better to be a shadow inside than a corpse in the fields. Some boys volunteered, but most, like you, only heard this before being taken away. Be good, okay? Don't cry in there, or they'll beat you. You didn't know the palace gates would be that cold. They didn't open, they swallowed you. The door was bigger than your dream of becoming a general, and it closed. Quiet as a sob swallowed whole. You're taken to the selection room. No one asks your name. No one asks your favorite color, dream, or biggest fear. Just one question. Have you eaten? To make sure you won't throw up from the pain. You don't remember clearly. How many held you down? The cloth stuffed in your mouth. Whose hands pinned your head? You only remember a crack like breaking bone, but it wasn't bone. And then the smell. Metal coal burning flesh, yours, seared to stop the bleeding. You didn't scream, because the ones who screamed often didn't wake up. You just stared at the ceiling with eyes that no longer belonged to a child and thought, I'm still alive. Strange alive, but something already dead. From that day, you have no name. You are the new one, that kid. The small, dumb-faced thing. The palace structure is like the guts of a giant snake. The deeper you go, the darker it gets. You lie at the bottom of that order. No power, no voice, no name. Just a tiny thing, what they call low-ranking eunuchs. You live with 6 others in a room smaller than your grandma's cattle stall. Above you, laundry for the concubines. Dripping wastewater at night. Low eunuchs don't have private rooms, official titles or greetings, only commands. You're not allowed to laugh and no one is allowed to laugh with you. They don't look at your face, they look below the belly to make sure you've completed the process. Because people in the palace only smile at those who still know how to scheme. And you receive one last thing before official duty. An order. No crying, Crying swells the eyes. Swollen eyes make the palace look ugly. An ugly palace shames the royal family. And when the royal family is shamed, you'll be the one mopping up the blood. So you learn to swallow sobs, swallow tears, even swallow the name your mother used each morning to call you in for porridge. From today, you're no longer a fuck to your mum. You're the lamp keeper, northeast corner, second floor, noble consort's quarters. Long name, but no one calls you by that. In Western Han records, some new eunuchs were given palace acclamation duty for 3 months, which meant working without ever being called by name. You learn to recognize who's ordering you by voice alone. You study the wind in the hallway to know if someone's approaching. Once, you almost got punished for turning around when you weren't sure someone called. The gate guard looked at you and said, "You think you're so important someone would call you by name." They only shout, "Hey, you." And if you turn a second too slow, you know what comes next. That first night in the palace, you can't sleep, not because of the pain, but because your mind is so empty. You're scared to hear your own thoughts. And that was only the first chapter. You haven't even seen blood yet, except your own. You close your eyes, tell yourself not to dream, because here, dreams are rarer than the Emperor's jade seal. Every wall hides a death inside. You thought the court was like a palace. Wrong. It's not a castle. It's a labyrinth that can swallow alive anyone who forgets the path. In the first 3 days, you didn't get enough sleep. Not because of orders, but because you were scared of getting lost on the way to pee at night. There are nearly 9,000 rooms in the Chang'an Palace, which means if you pass just 10 rooms a day, it'll take you nearly 3 years to go around once. And that's just theory. In reality, you might die before reaching room 12. Chang'an Palace isn't like a palace. It's a walled-off city, wall-to-wall hall to trap. Where you're standing used to be a porcelain fermenting room. 3 steps more is the robe-drying yard, 10 steps to the left, the minister's court zone. And with just one wrong turn, you take a turn out of this life. Each room has a function. Each level has a keeper. Each hallway turn hides someone who hates you, before you even know their face. You were given a map, but not on paper. It came from an old eunuch's mouth, hitting you as he spoke. Go straight to the red gate, turn left at the green railing. Look up for the crane, turn right down the cellar, or else you'll sleep forever in the dungeon. You didn't dare ask again. Here, those who ask too much get replaced the fastest, because asking means forgetting, and forgetting means you're a burden, and burdens aren't needed. On just the second day, you almost died, just because you carried the lamp into the wrong hall. From the western wing, where the concubines sleep, you mistakenly entered the eastern pavilion, where the Prime Minister naps. When caught, you only had time to say, "I mixed up the lamp." And the guard asked, "Is that lamp lit for the Emperor?" You shook your head. "Then it's a useless lamp." He raised his hand to put you out. Luckily, an old voice stopped him. "This kid is new. Let him clean the toilet hallway for 3 months to learn the way first." From then on, you understood. In the palace, every step is a choice between existing or being erased. No map tells you where is safe, because in the palace, safety is just a golden painted illusion. The walls are high, but they can't block rumors. The rooms are sealed, but they can't hide watching eyes. You once saw a eunuch carry porridge the wrong way. 3 days later, a new person was in that room, but no one mentioned the old one. No one dies officially in the palace. They're just taken to the hallway with no name. A corridor behind the eastern pavilion. No guards, no lights, just mouldy smell and footsteps that never echo. People say, if someone walks in there, they're either sent to prison or dealt with internally. You once heard a senior eunuch say, I had a brother. He took the wrong door once. The guard told him to bring the lantern to the noble consort, but the door opened east. He walked in. No one saw him again. Since then, you learn to count doors. 1, 2, 3. Never step through the fourth, unless it's marked with red ink. But that person is never mentioned again. You began to learn. Walk slowly, not too smooth. Any corner with wind has people. Any door with smoke has conflict inside. You learn to hear footsteps. You learn from those who never teach you. Only mutter to themselves at night. If you hear 3 slow steps, then 1 quick one. Someone changed the order last minute. If it's completely silent, either the emperor is passing or someone just disappeared. You know, if the steps are soft but fast, the empress is about to rage. You also learn how to stare at the walls, to know who's watching you. Because behind wall cracks, there are people inside people. There are ears, and inside ears are orders. You once heard a joke that no one dares laugh at. There are 3 things not to touch in the Forbidden Palace: the dragon robe, the food, and memories. The walls of Chang'an Palace aren't just stone. They are silent diaries, where nothing is written, but everything is recorded. Every scratch on a pillar is a burst of rage, every yellow stain where someone stood too long. At a spot with peeling paint, you see a faint carving. I don't want to disappear. First floor, smells of blood. Second floor, perfume. Third floor, the burning stench of power being scorched. You once leaned against a wall to cry quietly, but had to wipe it thoroughly. Because in the palace, even tears can leave traces. And that is what you learned after the first 72 hours. Not how to serve tea, not how to kneel properly, but how to exist without leaving a scent. You still don't know the names of the rooms, but you've learned. Wherever there's light, there's a shadow hiding just behind it. 100 ways to be punished for walking off beat. You think the palace has clear laws. It does. But those are just the ones hanging on walls. The ones that make people disappear are the ones no one ever wrote down. They call them invisible rules, and you'll learn each one through your own skin. For example, do not step higher than 3 knuckle joints. Do not touch silk towels without orders. Do not look up at someone speaking to you unless you're sure they're not more important than you. Do not look in a mirror unless ordered. Low-ranking eunuchs aren't allowed to see their own faces because that means they think they're worth remembering. Once, you tried seeing your reflection in a bowl of water. Someone behind saw and whispered, you smiling. You were punished to stand outside for 6 whole watch hours. Reason: your face didn't match the weather. Most of the time, everyone is more important than you. In the palace, you're not punished for being wrong. You're punished for making someone uncomfortable. Once, you sneezed near the Shangyi gate. The guard asked, how dare you make a noise louder than the Empress Dowager's footsteps? You wanted to apologize. But then you realized apologizing was wrong too, because low-ranking eunuchs are not allowed to have sound. Even a sneeze could be a crime. Once, a new boy sneezed while cleaning a noble lady's room. They said he disrupted the peace of her retreat. No one saw him the next day. The senior eunuch told you, you can be punished for breathing, but no one's ever gotten hurt from silence. You were forced to mop the hallway with your own robe because that's how you learn where you belong. Another time, you carried a fruit tray, perfect round fruits arranged in order, no flaws. But as you crossed the threshold, your step slipped just a beat. A concubine watched from a balcony and gave a slight smile, then turned away. 3 hours later, the head of the inner ward came and asked, "Who told you to walk in military rhythm?" I didn't know there was a rhythm. Exactly, not knowing is the mistake. You learned, walk in handmade rhythm near the eastern study, follow soldier rhythm near the back gate. Walk with no rhythm at all near the infirmary. Scents also have rhythm. Sandalwood, for the emperor lotus, for the empress's quarters, dried chrysanthemum, for the sick ward. Once, your roommate used the wrong scented wax from upstairs. The faint orchid smell floated along his robe hem. That night no one saw him return. And you absolutely must not walk too evenly, because even is the rhythm of those allowed to last. No one taught you that. You only knew when a boy your age got slapped so hard his ear bled, just for walking more evenly than the chief eunuch. The best eunuch in the palace is the one you can't remember. No one remembers how he walks. No one hears his steps. No one mentions his name. But every morning the lanterns are lit on time. The embroidered robe is hung just right. The tea never cools. The one who lasts longest is the shadow that slips through cracks without kicking up dust. You heard someone in the kitchen say that. You thought it was a joke. A week later, that person disappeared, and no one remembered their name. Even how you breathe is regulated. Don't huff. It sounds like a sigh. Don't hold your breath too long. People might think you're eavesdropping. You were once punished for sitting still too long. The reason? Things that don't make noise are suspicious. The chief eunuch once looked at you and said, "You're obedient, but you don't know when to panic, and not panicking is like dry wood, and dry wood snaps easily." You understood. No law says you're wrong. There's just someone more powerful than you, and they don't like you that day. Since then, you practice walking like a cat, scratching its ear at the right time, not straight, not crooked, not gliding, but like you're fumbling for something that isn't there. You learn to stand close without being present, to work without leaving a trace, to breathe without being heard. One day, you cried in the kitchen, not from hunger, but because someone told you you walk beautifully, but don't let them see it. And you realized the beauty of a eunuch is perfect disappearance. 3 months after entering the palace, you can now tell the difference between 4 types of footsteps, 5 kinds of breathing, 7 styles of turning your head. You can pretend to forget when asked, but also know when to half remember, half play dumb. And you understand deeply, survival in the palace doesn't come from intelligence. It comes from instinct, knowing when to be invisible and when to touch the air like a ghost. You were never awarded a medal, but every day your name isn't called is a successful day. At night, People usually turn off the lights to rest, but in the Han Palace, they turn off the lights to act without being remembered. You quickly realize night isn't for sleeping, it's for duty. And duty isn't a task, it's a test. It's how the palace decides who knows how to bow long enough and who doesn't. At night, there are no teachers, only the wall's eyes, the shadow's ears, and unexpected summons. On your first night shift, you're given no task, no guidance, no guide. You're led to a corner of the wall, then left there. Someone whispers before leaving, "If you're still here tomorrow morning, it means you've been accepted." There are 3 kinds of shifts, and none of them let you close your eyes. You once thought, maybe night will be more forgiving, because who can see in the dark? But you were wrong. In the dark, the palace's senses grow sharper. Light reveals expressions, but darkness hears the trembling of your heart. Guard duty, standing in the corridor until a rat nibbles your hem. Command duty, waiting for summons from rooms that never open. Standby duty, standing in nameless spots, ready to be called from. The shadows. At first you think, simple enough. Just stand. Until you stand for 6 whole watch hours. No leaning, no coughing. And most of all, your shadow must not touch another's. Once, you stood in the western corridor, right at the intersection of 2 hallways. A concubine passed by. The candlelight cast your shadow on the wall behind. The next morning, you were punished with 3 days without food. Written reason: the shadow intruded upon the aura of the master. From then on, you understood. Shadows have ranks too. Not everyone is allowed to cast a shadow on the wall. Night shifts have a schedule, but no one tells you in advance. You only know it's your turn when you're shaken awake by a voice cold as water down your neck. Get up, tonight is your turn. You fumble your way to the assigned spot. No light, no mat, no water. Only the iron breath of the palace and the wind sweeping away nameless things. You stand between 2 corridors, your back against a pillar. You don't dare close your eyes because even a faint sound might be a summon. And if you miss a summon, tomorrow you might be sent to the quietest hallway in Chang'an, where even rats don't dare squeak. Once, while on shift, you heard whispering, unclear if it was human or wind. You didn't dare turn your head because someone was once punished for turning without command. Night duty has no clock. Time is measured by wind gusts and the number of soundless breaths. You once counted 1,340 breaths. No one's come to switch. One night, it rained. You still stood. Rain pooled on your collar, trickled down your back, soaked into your thighs. But you didn't dare shiver, because shivering makes sound. They say a skilled eunuch can sleep standing up. But you know, the one who survives never closes his eyes in the dark. You've met people who've stood night duty too long, their skin pale like lamp smoke. Some looked asleep, but their eyes stayed open. Some stood tilted, but didn't fall. They call it the art of surviving like a breathing lamppost. After 3 months, you learn how to predict wind direction to guard your heart from the cold, use moon position to tell time without getting caught, scratch the top of your foot with your heel without making a sound. You also learn to befriend your shadow. Shadow is your second robe. It hides your face, masks your breath, and can take blame for you if you stand at the right angle. Once, Someone dropped the Empress's silk scarf from above. No one saw clearly who dropped it. Only one shadow leaned out to catch it. 3 were summoned. Only one was beaten. That one had the clearest shadow. From then on, you understood. The night is not for those with defined shapes. You begin walking lighter, standing more angled, and learn how to distort your own shadow. After a year, you see your shadow under a lantern. It no longer looks like you. It's smaller, fainter, and it seems used to trembling. You whisper to yourself, if one day I disappear, my shadow will be the only thing left. But then you remember, not all shadows are allowed to disappear. There's a place in the palace called the Forbidden Depth, the lowest level of the central hall, where those on night duty suspected of plotting or simply revealing a signal are taken. No one's executed immediately. They're led down and locked in an echoing corridor where only footsteps repeat endlessly. No voices, no eyes, only the sound of steps, one, by one, never stopping. Some say it's the sound of yourself falling, but then you laugh because you know even shadows aren't allowed to have names. Crown Prince. The title sounds glamorous, but for low-ranking eunuchs, it's the name of a room no one wants to be called to. The Crown Prince's room isn't a place for studying playing chess or reading like in modern illustrations. It's a place where a child, with the power of a future, can decide the fear in your eyes. You receive your first night shift by the western corridor next to the Crown Prince's room. Barely half a watch passes before a voice calls out, "Come in and clean the floor." You step in head down, holding a cloth. No eye contact, no speech, just clean. That child, the Crown Prince, is learning how to command. No books teach him. His teacher is you. Wiping too slowly is wrong. Too fast is insulting. Not wiping at all is worse. The Crown Prince is taught to read reactions, and you are the first living lesson. He doesn't have to say much because power doesn't require a voice, only the ability to make others hold theirs. Just as you are about to leave, that voice calls out again. "What's your name?" You don't answer. You are not allowed to have a name. Mute. You kneel. And then something flies past your head, hits the wall, shatters. An inkpot. You hear laughter, young laughter, but already used to giving orders. Others say you're lucky, it was a test. The Crown Prince learns to command from an early age, and eunuchs are the first training tools. A peer of yours was once chosen as a test subject, a kind of probe for the prince. His task was to tidy the bookshelf, not to clean, but to observe how the prince reacts when someone touches personal belongings. But who dares report if the prince gets angry? That day's log simply read, "The prince is slightly tired, needs quiet." The boy accidentally looked up. His gaze brushed the prince's robe. That one glance, enough to break a rule. Because in the palace, even eye contact has ranks. Looking sideways is insolence. Looking up is rebellion. Looking too long is provocation. That night the boy was said to be transferred. No one knows where, no one mentions him again. People in the palace call it the summons that never returns. No one says the name of that room. They just call it by its nickname, the Hollow Room. Because everyone called in. Leaves with nothing. No name, no sound, no shadow. An old eunuch once whispered, "There's no one in that place, only a young shadow, not yet fully formed, but already knowing how to make others dissolve." You never stand guard near that room again. But every night you hear small footsteps and the light tap of a fan against the wind, as if a tiny hand is writing someone's name into the breeze, then erasing it. Once someone in the palace told a story. An old eunuch, who taught the prince to read his first words, was called one night to the prince's private chamber. No one heard him return. The next morning, his desk still had an open book. The unfinished page read only one line. When he learns to write my name, it's time for me to disappear. You've kept your distance from the prince's room ever since. No one taught you to. It felt like instinct, like how wild animals avoid fresh blood. Later, you were stationed near the eastern pavilion, with a view of the corridor that leads there. One early morning, thick with fog, you saw a small figure walk by. Red robe, tiny heels, a fan in hand, no escort. You watched, and for the first time, you saw the wind move aside. Then you understood. The fan in the prince's hand wasn't just for cooling. It was a bestowed object, a stand-in for words used to grant or retract someone's existence. People in the palace call it the wind decree, an order given by air. When the fan spins 3 times, the one facing him is never to be spoken of again. From that moment you understood. Not every summons is meant to be answered. Not every footstep should be watched, and not every child is harmless. You begin rewriting your shift schedule, crossing out any turn near that area. Even if accused of frequent illness, you accept, because you believe a stomach ache might save your life, but curiosity only saves the final call. If someone asks, "Have you ever been on duty at the Crown Prince's room?" you smile, shake your head, and remain silent, because in the palace, silence is also a way to survive. You don't need to see the Empress's face to know she's coming. You recognize her shoes. They say, to hear the Dragon Lady's footsteps, you don't need ears, you need memory, and you train that memory with fear. 3 steady steps, 1 pause, heel touch, slight turn, then continue. That sound haunts you like a morning bell. Even if she's 3 corridors away, you still hear it. Because everyone in the palace learns one thing. Survival depends on your ability to count the steps of others. You're not allowed to walk faster than her, nor slower. You must vanish into her rhythm, like a shadow echoing the right moment, the right form. The first time you followed the Empress through the brocade hallway, you stepped 1 pace too far. Just 1, but enough to break the palace rhythm. Because the Empress isn't just a person, she is the central beat. Each of her steps is timed with the calendar, the auspicious hour, and the direction of the wind and earth. 1 step out of line is a sacred disruption. Just 1, but the sound of your heel echoed before hers. The Empress said nothing. She simply tilted her head slightly and smiled. 3 days later, your roommate, the one who once shared shifts with you, disappeared. They say, he once taught you how to walk. Since then, you've practiced walking in the dark, just so your footsteps align perfectly with hers. You no longer measure time by watches. You measure it by the weight of the Empress's heel each morning. It's no exaggeration, because someone really is assigned to count her steps. They're called the ceremony adjuster. If the Empress walks off beat, her entourage behind will miss a step. And if they miss, the court ritual fails. So you, the one walking behind, must be a shadow, Never even a fraction off. Heavy. She's angry light. She's been granted favour. No sound. You'd better write your farewell letter. An old eunuch once said, "You don't serve a person, you serve the tempo." He also taught you to listen in the wind, because the Empress's shoes don't always touch the ground. Some days she walks on silk rugs. No sound, only the rustle of wind brushing the corridor's surface. And you must understand what that wind is saying. You were once summoned to the inner court. On a rainy day, she was having tea. No command, no glance, just a light hand gesture toward the cold teapot. You understood. You poured fresh tea. And then, when she put her fan down, you bowed and stepped back 3 paces. No more, no less. No turning your back. You heard the fan snap open. Then, a soft You survived another rainy season. Once you asked the old eunuch, "If I follow the beat long enough, will there be a day I walk to my own rhythm?" He stayed silent a long while, then answered, "Only when you're no longer here can you choose your own beat." You understood in this place, everyone is an echo of someone else. No one is the original rhythm, just shadows. Walking on time. The following year, the Empress died. No trumpets, no drums, only the sound of shoes from a procession of eunuchs. 3 steps, 1 pause. Exactly how she used to walk. You didn't join that march. But when the footsteps faded into the distance, you broke down. For the first time in years, you no longer had anyone's steps to count. And you realized, with no one's rhythm left to remember, your feet didn't know where to go. You stood still, once the person who knew every rhythm in the palace. Now, lost within your own footsteps. Because in the palace, the first thing you lose isn't your name, it's your direction. No one teaches you how to clean up blood. There's no training program. No instruction manual with illustrated steps. Only one oral rule. If blood seeps into the cracks in the stone, then the next one to clean it will be you. At first, you thought they were joking, until one night. At the end of your overnight shift, you were called to the area near the West Palace Gate. Someone was lying there motionless. You couldn't make out the face. The order was not to look. You only saw blood running in long trails on the stone. It flowed from the steps to the floor, drawing a path like tree roots, curving, threading. Very alive. You didn't ask. No one answered. They called you the sweeper after the quarter hour. A nickname, not a name. In the palace, there are people whose jobs aren't even in the records. Not to be seen, not to be named, not to be remembered, only brought in after, and gone before sunrise. An old brush, a bucket of lukewarm water, and a faded cloth. That was all you were given. Some nights, instead of water, you were handed coarse salt, roasted on a copper stove. They said, hot salt doesn't just clean, it draws out the blood scent, so the spirits won't find their way back. You tried pouring it too early, when the stone was still cold, and burned your thumb. No one bandaged it, only one reminder. Human blood matters more than your hand. No spilling the water, no stains left behind, no delay for the next person stepping through. You crouched down, starting from the outer edge, then slowly moving toward the center, with your hands, with held breath, with a cold fear that wasn't yours, but belonged to the one who had just disappeared. You once heard the old eunuch say, "Clean well, so the next person can step forward," without realizing they're standing in death. You don't clean for cleanliness. You clean to erase evidence. You clean so the next one can pretend to live. One night, you spotted a dry streak of blood between two stones, just a tiny smear. You thought, it's fine, no one will notice. The next day, you were reassigned, which meant demoted. No one said a word, only someone saw the stain. That's it. Since then, you learned how to look down and still observe, to clean like painting, to paint like erasing a soul. You know no one comes to retrieve the body, only someone in black walking past and then gone. You don't know who they are, you only know, after them, it's you. No one says what crime the person committed. No documents, no declarations. Just a long smear on the stone, like a stroke of red ink. You once dreamed you slipped while cleaning, your head hit the stone step. And then, you saw yourself lying there, and yourself, a different you, came to clean. Then you woke up, the cloth still in your hand, the floor still slick, and you still had a chance to clean it before the dream became real. The old eunuch once said, "You know when you're no longer alive in the palace. It's when blood can spill and no one comes to clean it." Eventually, you stop dreaming, not because there are no more nightmares, but because you've grown used to the scent of old blood in your sleep. One morning, you were cleaning blood, just as the sun rose. The slanted light hit the floor, lit up a patch almost clean, and you suddenly realized the stone floor was never white. It simply stopped reflecting, like a mirror worn down, like a memory trying to be erased, like you, always present, but no longer anyone. You keep cleaning because no one's told you to stop. No one teaches you how to listen. Even less do they teach you when not to. In the palace, you don't have ears. You only have the responsibility to pretend you don't. There are nights you stand watch, beside a mother-of-pearl inlaid screen. Behind it is a dimly lit room, where power doesn't wear a dragon robe, but sheds itself like skin. Sounds echo out, sometimes hoarse and heavy, sometimes like a sigh. There's laughter, there are moans, there are orders, there are pleas, and sometimes you can't tell which sound belongs to whom. You don't close your eyes, but you learn to blur your pupils. You don't cover your ears, but you train yourself to block the thoughts forming in your head. Sometimes a voice suddenly rises. What did you hear? And you know, even if you've heard every word, you can only respond, "Sir, nothing." Because you're not allowed to reflect sound. You're just a wall that recoils, a shadow that knows its place. Once you heard something crash violently to the floor. You remembered your first day of training, when you were blindfolded, standing in the cold courtyard, and they created all kinds of fake noises, crying, whipping, the order for execution. If you reacted to the wrong sound, you were punished for real, not to test your loyalty, but to train your hearing, to match power. Then a scream struck straight into your spine. You nearly jumped, but the person beside you gripped your arm. Don't move, don't ask, don't remember. And you understood. This was what no one teaches. The art of survival, by burying your reflexes alive, by throwing away empathy, then pretending it never existed. At first you thought it was just the Emperor's pleasures, but then you heard more. One night, while on watch, you heard the fan snap shut 3 times, followed by a soft sliding door. The next day, the person who made that sound was gone. No one asked. No one searched. You knew. It was a type of inner palace code, and the one overheard always bore the consequence. There were sobs in the dark fingernails scratching mother-of-pearl bones creaking with every command to kneel. Laughter echoing, only to be silenced with a single clap. You once heard a palace maid whisper, and sometimes you hear voices in your head, even when no one is around. It's not a hallucination. It's a memory of sound, something that lingers so deeply. Even aged eunuchs still flinch at midnight, haunted by imagined crying. If I cry out loud, I'll vanish before morning. And you know, that's not a metaphor. So you learn to classify sounds. Moans begging for mercy, moans to prove loyalty, moans to stay alive, and moans just to know one still exists. You also learn how to measure power by vocal frequency. The lower the voice, the closer to the throne. The softer the moan, the more dangerous the source. Sometimes even a breath is enough to make you step back 3 paces. Not because you're afraid, but because you know exactly what happens. When you stand too close to that breath, you no longer hear like a person. You hear like stone, like a wall, like a nameless, functionless tool, present only at the right time. They call it the ear of the shadow. To hear without recording, to hear without understanding, to hear without ever retelling. One day, when you truly hear nothing anymore, no longer flinch at distant sounds, you realize power doesn't need to scream. It only needs you to be silent. You still hear, it's just, now you no longer need ears. You light the lamp, so others may plot in clarity. You don't hold power. You don't speak, but you light the lamp. And in the inner palace, the one who lights the lamp is the one who sets the stage for a performance of power. Your oil lamp doesn't just light the path, it lights up whose face is sitting too close, compares who is standing too far, exposes who is leaning toward whom, accuses who is holding the cup with the wrong hand. Some nights you're simply told, the light must shine from the left, and you know, that light isn't for the person sitting there to see their food, but so someone farther away can observe their expression, so someone can be compared, and someone else dimmed. You used to think light was meant to help people see, but you were once told, shine the light from behind, and the one in front won't dare speak the truth. Shine the light from below, and they'll look like a demon. And you realized, light can also bend truth, just like words, simply by shifting the angle. But here, light is what makes hiding impossible. You walk into the room holding 3 bronze lanterns. People like you in the palace servant records hold a title few know, night attendant of the palace, trained from childhood to light lamps, not for brightness, but to illuminate properly. In one lesson, you were taught how to trim the wick, so the light casts a green hue, making faces in the room appear pale, like they're ill, not to heal them, but to make them suspected, shunned, or removed from the list of those favored. Just misplacing the lamp by 10 degrees could make a concubine seem like she's trying to sneak a glance at the emperor's bed, and just like that, her name would vanish from tomorrow's list. Light is not neutral, it is not impartial, it has a master, a purpose. And someone like you, who holds the lamp, is not allowed to have opinions. Once you saw a maid scolded, "Why light the candle in front of a mirror?" You didn't understand. Then you heard a whisper, The reflected flame revealed two people instead of one. Lighting it that way is like accusing someone of being a third party in the shadows. The girl wasn't beaten. She was relocated. No one knew where. You began to fear light, not because it burns, but because it reflects things no one wants revealed. One day, you lit a lamp for the Empress's late-night reading. You placed the lamp on the right as usual. She glanced at you for a second, then turned to her maid. Replace it with a purple paper lamp. The yellow light makes me look old. You understood. Lamps must also flatter, not just illuminate, but flatter the right people. In the Eunuch storeroom, lamps are categorized politically. White lamps, official rituals; red lamps, festivities; purple lamps, to soothe; colorless lamps are the kind you never use because true light is forbidden. One maid whispered to you, "If I could choose the light for tonight, I'd choose grey, because it makes everyone look the same." But she wasn't the one who got to choose. And that night's banquet ended with 3 people being relocated in the dark. You remember once lighting lamps for a private temple ritual, where 36 oil lamps were arranged in a laurel circle before the altar. You were told, "Don't let the eastern lamp go out first." But the night wind slipped in, and that exact one flickered out first. The next day, a concubine was expelled from the palace. No one said anything, only whispered, "The ancestors are displeased." One more person vanished. You still hold the lamp each time you set it down. You study the angle carefully. Don't let the flame highlight someone who is sad. Don't let the shadow fall on the shoulder of someone who is smiling. Because you know, in the palace, darkness might not kill, but light in the wrong direction definitely can. You once heard a saying, if you want someone to disappear, let them stand in the light for too long. And you know, you are the one who flips the switch. You were taught how to scrub stone floors, how to burn incense with the right hand, how to bow at 3 45-degree angles. But no one taught you that. Even the ancestral shrine in the palace has a curtain. Not to block dust, but to say without saying. Not everyone has the right to look directly at their own origin. But no one taught you how to endure a cry behind a silk curtain. It wasn't loud. It wasn't persistent. It was muffled like a cloth wiping a wet floor. And strangely, no one turned around. No one asked. You once thought the Forbidden Palace was for the beautiful, the powerful, the chosen. But after many years, you realized it's also where children are forbidden to be children. There was a little girl about 9 years old, brought in as a servant in training. Every time she heard thunder, she curled up like a wet cat. One time, you saw her trembling in a corner, holding a piece of silk embroidered with the word Mother. Before you could say anything, the senior maid snatched the cloth and tore it in half. You don't have the status to remember anyone. From now on, the emperor is your only father and mother. You stood still, and you hated yourself for being used to standing still. In the inner palace, family is luggage confiscated at the gate. Even the empress isn't allowed to speak too much about her son. Longing must be woven into brocade, quietly embroidered into phoenixes, tucked into a warm dessert served on a cold night. Never spoken, never cried. One time, you heard 3 knocks on the wall behind the garden watchroom. You remembered in one rare storytelling night with the old eunuchs, someone mentioned the legend of the wall-knocking maid. No one remembered her name, just that she was once locked away for crying over her mother in front of a superior. Since then, every night there were knocks. No one confirmed it, but no one denied it either. They called it the sound of those who lived as if already dead. At first, you thought it was rats, but it happened every night. Later, an old eunuch told you. That was the spot where a maid was locked away after calling out for her mother in front of outsiders. Not executed, just moved to a place where no one would remember. They say she taught herself to make noise just to prove she still existed. You don't know if the story is true, but ever since, whenever you heard soft knocks in the dark, you gently touched the wall, not to respond, but to remind yourself, don't let your heart be moved away like that. There are people in the palace who are mothers, some who were stripped of being daughters, and some, like you, taught that remembering slows your steps. In the servant records, no one is listed with a father or mother's name. Only titles instead: lamp attendant, imperial physician, or sometimes just maid number 82. Real names, if they ever existed, were left behind at the palace gate, like old straw sandals. Some secretly stitched their mother's name into the hem of their undershirt or inside their sleeve lining. But if discovered, they would be demoted or moved to another section without notice. Only the day of entering the palace, the day of reassignment, and the day they stopped breathing. One evening, you were wiping the stone hallway and saw a new young maid trying to embroider a small chrysanthemum on her sleeve. You were about to tell her to remove it, since decorating garments was against regulations. But you looked closely. The stitches formed a broken circle. Because my mother's name is Chrysanthemum, but they told me I couldn't write that word. You watched her stitch, then pretended not to see, because sometimes loyalty doesn't lie in reporting, but in knowing when to stay silent. You returned to your room, lit a lamp and wiped your hands. These hands had wiped blood, wiped tears, wiped ash from offerings, but could never wipe away longing, because in the palace longing isn't wiped. It's hidden in places no one looks, like a silk curtain or the human heart, because dreaming is the most luxurious thing in the palace. After freedom and laughter, you once thought sleep was a reward, but in the palace, sleep is just the time you're not being commanded. No one teaches you how to lie down properly, breathe quietly, or turn without making a sound. But if you don't learn, sleep becomes a reason for punishment. Your mat is laid just inside the door of the kitchen servants' quarters. Before dawn, you're jolted awake by the sound of water pouring into iron pots. Just as you drift off again, you hear firewood being chopped, and throughout the night people pass by, stomping their heels fast, as if chasing ghosts inside them. You dare not dream, nor dare speak in your sleep. In the palace, even a moan can be labelled a dream offence. A eunuch once said, someone was punished by being tied for 3 days, just for calling their mother's name in a dream. Because if you still remember your mother, it means you still carry a part of your humanity that hasn't been palace-fied. You once asked an old eunuch, is it ever allowed to dream in the palace? He looked at you for a very long time, then said, only those who still have parents, who still have a real name, who still have a soul, are qualified to dream, and you have no name, no place to return to, no night peaceful enough for dreams. And whenever you do dream, you always wake in terror, because you fear that dream is more real than reality. Once you dreamed you were running down the golden tiled corridor. On the other side was your mother, breaking bean paste buns. The aroma so strange, it made you forget where you were. You whispered, "Mother." At that moment, someone kicked you in the ribs, because moaning in a dream is also a violation. In the storage of old items, you once saw a wooden pillow carved with lotus flowers. They say such wooden pillows were issued to palace servants in Han times, not for comfort, but to prevent turning in sleep, avoiding ritual violations. Some believe sleeping on wood pillows reduces dreaming, and thus reduces suspicion of improper thoughts. On the corner was carved in small handwriting, "A night without dreams is a safe night." You took it, used it for 3 months, then switched to a soft cloth pillow, because you began to dream of crying, uncertain whether from pain or relief at being able to cry. In the palace, some stay awake for power, and even those who sleep don't all sleep the same. You once heard eunuchs say, sleep in the palace also has ranks. Low-ranking servants are not allowed to sleep before the morning shift. Night guards must sleep curled up by the door, ready to wake if called. Some have never known a solid 2-watch sleep. Some stay awake for plots. Some stay awake waiting for news of favor. And you stay awake fearing dreams that aren't yours. You once heard of a maid locked in a dark room for 7 days, just for dreaming she sat on the throne. No witnesses, only you slept beside her. Accidentally mentioned it at morning tea. She vanished that afternoon, and you never dared dream of being someone else again. Sleep in the palace is a blink mixed with fear and survival instinct. Every night you remind yourself, no dreams, no tossing, no memory. One day you saw a young maid fall asleep in the temple courtyard. Her lips moved as if speaking in her sleep. You were about to wake her, but then realized she was smiling very gently, as if she'd never lost anything. You did not wake her. You sat by her side and protected that sleep intact, even if just once, because sometimes a person who once dared not dream understands better than anyone the value of a dream uninterrupted. You can scrub floors, carry water, obey like a shadow, but if allowed to keep something personal, you'd ask only for one peaceful night and one dream unpunished. Because the place where history is kept is the first place to erase your name. There's a very ancient paradox in the court. The closer one is to power, the easier they are swallowed. You are the eunuch who transcribes edicts, observes astrological charts, keeps the record vault. You once took pride. I don't just live, I preserve the dynasty's memory. Until one day you understand what you know is exactly why you must disappear. You once saw secret edicts never published. Edicts repealing the crown prince, written then torn. Lists of rewards, logged then burned. You know the nights when the empress consults the imperial physician. No officials are notified. You once cleaned the brush for Seema the court historian, but he told you, I once saw 2 historians beheaded just for refusing to alter the word defeat. They chose death to uphold truth and were erased from the official annals. What is written in history is what the world is allowed to remember. what truly happened, was burned before the ink dried. You once kept the record of the night Prince Liu Ju was banished, recorded the exact hour, the witnesses' names. The next morning, the eunuch attendant came, told you to rewrite it, omit the biological mother's name, change power struggle to illness. You held the brush, your hand shook, and for the first time, you feared the words you were writing, because you understood. Once that rewrite is complete, the original is burned. A new edict replaces it. An official history from now on is no longer what you witnessed, but what the court allows to be remembered. A eunuch was once stripped of his hat, locked in a sealed room, just for remembering an event from 5 years ago that those above wanted forgotten. His name was erased from the inner imperial roster. Even the teacher who taught him was reassigned to kitchen duty, forbidden to recall that student's name. The court doesn't punish errors. It punishes memory. Memory in the palace is a weapon. If you don't know how to use it to stay silent, best not to remember at all. You saw Historian Sleepless look away when blood flowed across the steps. You saw the censor shrink back when a maid collapsed at a consort's investiture. You saw the emperor tear an edict in half and say, "Then it never existed." And you understood. History is a castle without foundation. It stands tall because it's built upon those who were never recorded. You once heard an old eunuch say, "The court doesn't need real people, only those who know how to bow at the right time. Those who remember too much aren't fit to be shadows." One night, you stood by the lamp reading records. On the table was a note about a poisoning of a concubine, crossed out. You were about to put it away. A hand pulled you aside and burned the page. You stepped back, your hand still smelling of ash, and you knew. From now on, you are no longer the keeper of history. You are the one who must forget first. History books are reserved for emperors, generals, and glory fit to be told. But you knew they cried. You saw them fall. You cleaned the floor after each clean-up. You know, more than they want anyone to know. So you will not have a single line in any book. No name carved on a stele. No recollection of how many empresses you stood before, how many princes you escorted, how much blood you wiped. You will be just a shadow behind the curtain, or footsteps in a corridor that no one names. Because in the court, the one who writes history is the king, and he who lives through history is merely evidence to be hidden. When someone without a family still knows what loyalty means, you once thought to be loyal to someone you had to love them, or at least believe in them. But in the palace, no one asks whether you want to or not. Loyalty is not a feeling. It is something required along with meals, commands and punishment. You are the eunuch who held a fan for a young prince. They told you, if he lives, he'll remember you. If he dies, you'll die too, or have to pretend you never met. And then he really died. Smallpox, or maybe poisoning. No one dared ask. You stood by the bed, saw them wipe down all the objects, burn all his toys, rewrite the cause of death. Your name was crossed off the service list, as if you hadn't fanned him for 3 whole years. No one asked you to swear an oath, but from that moment on, you never spoke of the prince again. Not because of an order, but because you made a promise to yourself. Once a new servant asked you, "Why don't you ever talk about your former master?" You smiled and said, He's no longer here, but I still have to be here, and I don't want people to mention him in a pitying tone. One night, a concubine handed you a hairpin and said, "Keep this if I don't come back. Bury it for me." You nodded. 10 days later, she passed from a chill, buried without the pin, without farewell. You once kept a poetry book for a maid written during 3 years she was never summoned. When she was transferred to the medicine room, the book was still in your robe. No one asked what you were hiding. No one wanted to know. You are a shadow in the palace. No wife, no children, no ancestors honored. Yet you are the only one who remembers the voice of the dead prince, knows where the concubine's hairpin is hidden, knows the poems of a maid that were never read aloud. You understand better than anyone. Loyalty is not about keeping secrets. Loyalty is keeping a promise, even when no one is alive to remind you to. No one recorded your promise. No one thanks you for keeping it. No one knows you still burn incense for the prince, using embered ash from the old kitchen brazier. You are the one cut off from all blood ties, and yet you understand deeply what blood means, what duty means. You don't need records because everything that matters is etched inside you, even if you're the one no one remembers by name. When you learn to love silence. At first, you were afraid of the dark, because in the palace, every shadowy corner might be where someone once vanished. You walked quickly down unlit corridors. You didn't dare look up where shadows clung to walls. You learned to avoid stepping where you shouldn't, even if you couldn't see a thing. Then, you got used to it. Not because the darkness became less frightening, but because it asked nothing of you. No need to bow, no need to answer, no need to choose words that suited the ears of the powerful. By day, you had to smile, to serve, to hear all kinds of full speech. By night, there was only the sound of bats beyond the wall, coal fading slow in the furnace. You could be yourself, or no one at all, and somehow that felt like peace. Once, a young eunuch asked you, "Why don't you light a lamp?" You answered, "Because in the dark, no one forces you to bow. You know the palace is not a home, you don't have one, but darkness has never turned you away. There was a night you stood alone in the abandoned paper storeroom. Wind through broken bricks, the smell of old ink ashes and mildewed silk. You felt calmer there than anywhere people lived. You quietly thought, if I could choose where to die, I'd choose this place. Silence is the one thing that never betrayed you. It doesn't bring up old things, it doesn't whisper lies. It doesn't hurt you by echoing what someone else once said. You've lived long enough to understand. Hear those who speak too much, lose their voices early, but those who keep silent keep themselves. Darkness is the only place where you don't have to perform. It's where you dare to sigh without fear someone will hear. It's where you can remember, forget, ache, or feel nothing. And no one will judge. No one gives you medals for silence. But because of it, you survive. Not honored, but still here. And sometimes survival itself is a kind of victory. In a place where no one's allowed to be truly alive. Qin Dynasty, 9 AD, 23 AD. The Qin Dynasty, also known as the Qin Empire, lasted briefly from the year 9 to the year 23. It was a period in Chinese history marked by bold reforms initiated by Emperor Wang Mang. Upon taking power, Wang Mang launched a series of reforms aimed at redistributing wealth and power, particularly in the fields of agriculture and economics. One of his most notable innovations was the establishment of a new royal system in which he tightly controlled land ownership. Wang Mang limited the right of private individuals to hold large tracts of land and implemented a policy of land redistribution to ensure fairer allocation to the people. This was intended not only to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor, but also to encourage more efficient land use by farmers. Wang Mang also carried out monetary reforms to stabilize the economy and strengthen central authority. He introduced a new currency and established stricter controls over the circulation of money in the economy. These changes aim to curb inflation and prevent currency speculation, while also boosting public confidence in the financial system. You're standing in the inner courtyard of the Grand Commandant's residence in Chang'an. The air has just begun to chill. The northern wind rushes through rows of stone columns, carrying the scent of rotting paper, black ink, and shapeless dreams. Before you stands a thin man, arms hugging the stack of books. His head bowed so low it seems he's apologizing to the earth. His name is Wang Mang, and he doesn't yet know that his trembling legs are about to step onto a path with no return. Wang Mang was the grandson of Empress Wang, one of the most powerful women of the Han Dynasty. He was raised in the Wang clan, a family where everyone knew how to bow at the right time and raise their heads when it mattered. But unlike others in his family, Wang Mang didn't build his career on banquets. He didn't tax the people, didn't stuff gold into his robes. He spent his youth reading books. Historical records note, he was so frugal, he patched his robes with old cloth, didn't use gold or silver, didn't keep concubines, and his home never echoed with laughter. In an age when loyalty to the emperor meant knowing where to distribute favors, a man like him was both strange and a rare glimmer of hope. At the time of his rise, the Han court was ruled by child emperors, empress dowagers, and ministers bickering like dogs over bones. Wang Mang was appointed Grand Tutor, then Regent, and became almost a king without a crown. The people called him Holy Duke, believing he alone could preserve virtue in chaotic times. In a letter to court officials he wrote, "The world falls into disorder when it loses the way. If no one restores the rights, people will return to being beasts." It might sound dramatic, but it was a sincere belief from a man who thought the word righteousness could stand against poverty. And what did he do after taking the throne? Not build palaces or redraw maps, but write laws. Not one or two, he created an entire restoration code, a system to rebuild society in the image of the ancient Zhou dynasty. He issued edicts banning land sales, redistributed state lands to the people, imposed landholding limits, known as the well-filled system. He decreed the abolition of slavery, replacing it with a guest labor system, but without defining legal rights or duties. Then, he changed the currency too. Silver was banned. Copper coins were cast to resemble seashells. At one point, over 20 different currencies were circulating in the market. And for each law, he cited the Book of Documents, the Book of Rights, as if morality could replace hunger. The problem was, the people didn't understand, nor did the officials, and famine, taxes, and disasters didn't wait for anyone to finish reading edicts. Markets emptied, rice prices soared. In many rural areas, people returned to bartering, unsure which coins were legal. One account tells of a potter in Yingchuan who, after 3 months of business, ended up with a sack of seashell coins no one would accept. And from Chang'an, where orders were given, to the borderlands, more than 10 small uprisings erupted in just the first year of monetary reform. In the southern countryside, red-haired peasants began to gather. They called themselves the Red Eyebrows. Their hair turned red from eating wild grass and lacking salt. They didn't understand policy. They no longer believed in the court. And they had nothing left to lose. Meanwhile, in the Lulin region, forests and hills hiding woodsmen, porters and refugees, rebellion stirred. They once bowed to law, but now the law no longer filled their bowls. The first uprising, just 30 men with bamboo spears, looted a granary in Jinye, but it was the beginning of thousands to follow. In the year 6, the child emperor died. No successor was named. The entire court turned to Wang Mang. Everyone assumed he would merely hold the throne until a new emperor was chosen. But instead, he did the unexpected, declared himself son of heaven, founded a new dynasty, named it Xin, meaning new. No bloodshed, no war, only jade seals, a few hundred edicts quoting the Book of Rights, and a calm proclamation. Heaven's mandate has changed, I shall begin anew. Was he a usurper? Yes. He wasn't of the Liu family. He had no inherited mandate, no strong faction backing him. But he wasn't like any other usurper before. He didn't seek power for glory, but because he truly believed, if the world is wrong, then I must make it right. And from that moment, a scholar ruled a country with the very things that made him famous: paper, ink, and ideals. But the problem is, history isn't written with brushes, it's written with blood. You're sitting inside a government office in Luoyang district. It's pouring rain. People are lining up, holding land registration papers, yet none of them knows whether the characters written on them are still valid. Even the officials are confused because they themselves are relearning the new laws, and those laws were written in the classical language of the Book of Documents. No annotations, only ancient references. Immediately upon founding his dynasty, Wang Mang issued a flood of decrees. Not gradually, but a total overhaul from the country's name, official ranks, measurements, to marriage and civil law. The law was called the Xin Reform. It wasn't meant to maintain current order, but to remake the world through the eyes of a scholar, too devoted to ideals. The well-filled system. People were only allowed to own a certain amount of land. Excess land was confiscated. Land sales were banned. All land belonged to the Son of Heaven, distributed by merit, not money. Sounds noble, but in rural areas, land was the only thing people had passed down since their great-grandfather's time. The new law aimed to restore the moral order of the Zhou era, but failed to consider the Han reality, a society with merchants, loans, and civil contracts, and no one lives on ancient sayings. A grain merchant in Nanyang district, when his fields were confiscated for exceeding the limit, asked, "So I'm supposed to grow grain on paperwork?" The official replied with half a page of the Book of Documents. No one understood, and the merchant stopped paying taxes. The law became more like a sermon than an instrument of governance, and the people couldn't live off sermons. A poor farmer was granted land, rejoiced. 3 months later, the local official came to take it back for failing to prove 3 generations of ancestry. Wang Mang decreed the abolition of slavery. The whole country cheered, the court applauded, and then everything stalled because after abolishing it, he issued no replacement law. There was no definition of what a guest labourer was, no civil rights, no labour regulations, no system for resolving disputes. As a result, wealthy families kept the same people, only changed their titles. The freed slaves were cast out with no land, no money, and no record in the household registry, a society full of people who didn't belong to any legal system. Did you know? In the new Shin laws, a remarried woman could be punished with lashes, and if a single mother gave birth, the child couldn't be registered because there was no valid father. For lineage confirmation, family law was written according to Zhou rights, but lacked practical systems for a shifting agricultural and urban society. That meant widows were isolated, orphans had no household registration, the mentally ill were excluded from grain distribution, an empire where every person needed 5 kinds of paperwork to prove they had the right to eat rice. And if you were a woman, those documents might still not be enough. The new law valued chastity to an extreme. Divorced women were not allowed to remarry. Widows under 40 had to stay single, or else their entire household lost rice rations. A young mother in Changsha gave birth after her husband died in conflict. She wasn't allowed to register the child because she no longer had a legal husband. The baby became nameless in the registry. Moral law turned women into evidence for a decaying system. Laws kept changing. This month, the land limit was 100 mu. Next month, it dropped to 50. Each time came with an edict, as long as an epic poem. County officials stopped ruling. They passed all complaints up the chain. Villagers sued each other over a plot of land, and the case dragged on. 3 years, because no one was sure which version of the law was valid that month. Someone once compared the Shin Dynasty to a legal building with no staircase. Everyone could see the ideals above, but no one knew how to climb up. In a letter left behind by a city guard of Chang'an, he wrote, "One night I arrested an old woman for not carrying her rice pass. She said she submitted it to the office but couldn't remember which month. I kept her in custody, and when morning came, she wasn't alive anymore." The problem with Wang Mang's dynasty wasn't that he didn't want to do good, but that he thought good meant the past. But the people no longer lived in the Zhou dynasty. They lived in an age of floods, hunger, and merchants. His laws didn't make people believe in justice, only made them fear they were wrong, without knowing how. No one expected. The first reform of the Shin dynasty would begin with the shape of coins. Imagine this. One day, the government declares, "Money is the root of chaos. We shall return to the model of seashells." Sounds deeply restorationist, but the problem is, you're living in a world with trade taxes, wages, and camel freight costs. And no camel accepts being paid in seashells. In just the first 5 years, the court issued over 20 different types of currency. Round coins with square holes, knife money, coins cast in the shape of shells, coins as big as pot lids, coins as small as shirt buttons. Some were made of bronze, some only of iron, some weren't cast at all, just I owe us from the state, and all were called ritually correct, morally right, in accordance with the book of documents. But because they were minted too quickly, too widely, with no quality control, counterfeit coins flooded the markets. In southern districts like Jiangxi, people spoke of underground mints, where blacksmiths forged coins all night, using their own molds and cheap alloys. Local officials turned a blind eye because they were getting a cut or ran their own mint. Some places even cast coins in the wrong shape, but still circulated them as long as they engraved the words Xin approved. When those coins reached the people, they couldn't tell real from fake. They only knew yesterday they could still buy rice, today they couldn't. But the market didn't understand the book of documents. People took grain to the market only to receive coins that were banned the next day. You live in a district near Chang'an. Your wife sells pickled melons. Last week, she exchanged 1 knife coin for 5 sheng of rice. This week, a buyer says that type of money has been recalled. You go to exchange the coin. The official says only if you have a certificate proving the coin was purchased legally. You ask, where's that certificate? He points at a 17-line long decree. You walk away, and your wife stops selling pickled melons because no one dares to pay with money anymore. Towns begin reverting to bartering grain for salt for clothes, clothes for wine. The merchant class. Once the lifeblood of the economy starts leaving the cities, or worse, hoarding goods, refusing to trade. No commerce means no taxes. No taxes means no salaries for officials. In the countryside, farming cycles are disrupted. The cost of tools changes. With every new currency decree, one day a plough ox is worth 2 knife coins. The next, no one wants it. Farmers stop borrowing seeds, stop hiring workers, stop planting. In Longxi region, many villages only keep seed grain, refusing to sow, because they don't know what currency they'll sell with come harvest. That year, rice output dropped by nearly half land remained. People went hungry. No salaries. Officials began accepting bribes in goods. A soldier guarding the state granary once wrote, "We guard stores full of silver, but can't buy a single bowl of porridge because silver is banned and the new coins, no one accepts them." Trust is the greatest currency of any regime. And when the people no longer trust money, no longer trust decrees, no longer trust the law, then even with 1 million troops, that dynasty can't buy peace. From the south, the red-haired people, the Chime, begin seizing grain stores. From the Lulin forests, bands of displaced citizens rise establishing their own bases, not because they wanted to rebel, but because they could no longer live off the court's currency. And you know what's strange? A few months earlier, in Julu, a major marketplace was burned down by its own people. Why? The district governor forced them to use a new coin, the 5 Xin knife, for all transactions, while no one knew how to convert to it. When troops came to suppress them, they carried shields but didn't strike, because they too were owed wages, forced to accept the new currency, and no one would trade rice for it. The whole market sank into ashes, and the silence of the soldiers that day was the final collapse of trust. Many rebel groups began minting their own coins. Some engraved heaven's blessing. Some molded smiling faces. What did it mean? It meant they no longer needed the court to create a world worth living in. And that is every ruler's greatest fear. Wang Meng's currency reform wasn't just an economic failure, it was the collapse of logic itself. You cannot rearrange an entire solar system when the people are planting rice by the moon's cycle, selling grain by the Tao, and feeding families with coins saved since their father's time. Wang Meng thought he was redirecting the flow of moral order, but what he really did was shatter the economic flow entirely and build no bridge to replace it. And when there's no money, no trust, no trade left, the only thing people have in their hands are sticks and stones. What comes to mind when you hear about a society that reveres morality and upholds chastity? A peaceful place, or a small sealed room with no exit if you happen to be born with a female body? Under Wang Meng's rule, the things that were once just advice in the Book of Songs and the Book of Documents were now written into law, stamped punishable, and with no room for exceptions. For women, the word propriety was no longer a virtue, but a shackle. The law required widows under the age of 40 were forbidden from remarrying. If they insisted, the entire clan would be erased from the household registry. Women who were divorced were not allowed to return to their birth family, for they were deemed tainted. In Nanhai district, there was a young wife, 27 years old. Her husband died of malaria. After 3 years of mourning, she married a blacksmith in the village. 2 months later, the entire village lost its state-issued rice rations. The magistrate posted a decree in the marketplace. One woman's broken virtue pollutes the entire community. And so, women began to live without daring to love, daring to speak of what they wanted, left with nothing but tears and silence. A single mother in Fufeng gave birth when her husband went missing during unrest because she had no marriage certificate. The child was denied food aid, denied birth registration, denied burial if it died. Wang Meng's moral code stated, a child without status is a child born of sin, but an infant's belly doesn't know what sin is. It only knows hunger. And many women, seeing their children curled up from starvation, began to ask, who was ritual propriety made to protect? In the grand estates, palace maids, courtesans, and concubines were almost never listed in household records. They existed like shadows. They died without names recorded. They gave birth, and the child was labeled mixed blood. The Qin dynasty had more than 70 regulations on women's proper conduct, but not a single one forbidding violence. In fact, if a husband beat his wife to preserve household decorum, he faced no punishment. Thus, propriety became a curtain over bruises. Etiquette became a knife, punishing the faintest voice. Some women argued, resisted, ran away from their villages, cut their hair, changed names, followed Confucian teachers, but rejected the rituals of Confucianism. Some became sword wielders in the Kaimei rebel bands. Some worked kitchens in the Lulin armies, but still hid knives beneath their robes. Some followed healers, learning medicine, saving lives in the shadows. They are not named in the annals of history, but they were present in every escape, and in every fire that burned the edicts of ritual codes. There was the hand of a woman who had been silent her entire childhood. Some may say, Wang Meng only wanted a stable society. Morality is necessary. But no morality should be allowed to starve a mother. No ritual should be allowed to bury a child's name. The death of a dynasty doesn't begin with swords and spears. It begins with the sighs of those who don't dare speak up. And when women stop bowing their heads, an entire system of rituals will fall with them. If you were living in the 5th year of the Qin Dynasty and walking into the city of Chang'an, what would you see? City walls nearly 10, Jiang tall, reinforced with green stones imported from the Wei River region. Streets divided into square blocks, each intersection with a guard post. An artificial lotus pond at the southern market, where officials came to write poetry on the first day of each month. Law boards carved in wood hung at major junctions next to stalls selling steamed buns and pink salt. Chang'an was the capital of ideals, a place where every philosophy, from Duke of Zhou to Confucians to the Yin-Yang school, was rewritten and decreed. And every line of law was seen as a moral endeavor. In just the first 3 years, the court issued more than 300 legal codes to regulate civil behavior. Inheritance laws, asset classification laws, rice tax laws based on age and gender, funeral rights laws based on social hierarchy, laws requiring self-evaluation of moral conduct every moon cycle, and each law exceeded 400 characters, written in parallel prose, quoted the Book of Songs, cited anecdotes from the Zhou Dynasty. After reading, commoners didn't know what they were supposed to do. Officials weren't sure who to punish. People said that a district magistrate in Pingliang, when ruling on a land dispute, recited poetry instead of delivering a verdict, because he didn't understand the law, but didn't dare admit that before the people. By the 7th year of the Qin Dynasty, every household in Chang'an had to paint their doors red, hang book of documents calligraphy outside the veranda, set up ancestor altars facing north, and report filial piety levels every full moon. Result: painters got rich. The poor used chicken blood to paint doors instead of actual paint, and many filial piety reports were copied using the same ink block. Chang'an wanted to become the model city, but turned into a paper maze. No one knew exactly which law they were violating, only that it was safer to stay silent and bow every time the town drum echoed. The eastern city once gathered more than 200 merchants, trading salt, iron, textiles, and jade from the western regions. After the currency reform, most left the city. Those who remained stopped trading because they didn't want to exchange goods for the so-called short knife currency, said to align with Confucian teachings. A paper shop hung a sign, "Virtue coins won't buy lunch." The magistrate removed the sign, issued a fine. 3 days later, 5 more shops posted the same sentence. And soon, the eastern city guards began wearing plain clothes so they wouldn't be recognized when begging for rice bribes. Chang'an was the heart of the dynasty, but by the end of the 14th year, that heart began to stop beating. The central treasury was still full. Decrees were still carved into stone, letters from Wang Mang still began with, "I toiled day and night for the world," but the warm rice cakes were gone. The well water in West City tasted of rust because the pipes weren't repaired. A beggar died stiff beneath a law board titled, "Compassion is the foundation of moral governance." And when the center could no longer nourish the alleys, all that poetry of law became echoes in an empty hallway. Wang Mang believed he was creating an ideal Chang'an, where poetry and doctrine were printed on bricks, where laws didn't just manage, but enlightened. But laws written like poetry are only beautiful when read. They don't feed empty stomachs, don't erase anger, don't mend an empire crumbling from the very lines it drew. And Chang'an, once the center of power, became a beautiful, silent city where people dared not dream for fear of breaking the law. The Qin dynasty did not fall because of an army, not because of a battle, not because of a palace conspiracy. It fell because of those who had no name in the dream Wang Mang had painted. The farmers who didn't understand the book of documents, the guards who weren't paid, the mothers who brought rice to trade for medicine, but received a useless knife coin in return. When a dream is too pure, those left behind will become fire. They were called red eyebrow rebels because they dyed their hair with clay before going to battle. The Chime had no imperial banner, no decrees, no governing principles. They had only one reason to rise up: hunger. Starting from the region of Shou County, where the harvest had failed for 3 straight years, the Chime began taking over abandoned granaries, distributing rice to the people, burning tax records, smashing law boards. Their leaders weren't generals, but people like Fan Tuan, a fortune teller, and Jie Yin, once a student of the Book of Songs expelled for criticizing poetic law. People called them devils, but also called them midnight rice cakes. In the Lulin Mountains, the second group began gathering. No flags, no flyers, only whispers in the forest, telling each other, "Don't go back to the village. There's porridge here." The Lulin didn't claim the throne. They didn't demand land. They had no map. They simply reclaimed rice from warehouses, gave it to the elderly, stopped money wagons, dumped coins into the river, wrote one sentence on the wall: "You can't eat money, but you can eat rice." They lived like grass, died like grass, but grew everywhere. The prefect in Jiangxia wrote to the court, "I have 100 soldiers, but 60 refuse orders because they haven't received rice in 2 weeks." In Liang region, soldiers began using the excuse, still reading the laws, to avoid patrol. In Fufeng County, the entire treasury was broken into by locals. They took the bronze, melted it into pots. Some places, people minted their own coins engraved with "Save yourself." Proclamations still hung in every county, but no one read them. No one feared them. No one believed. One proclamation cannot hold up the sky. One code of law cannot hold the people. Wang Mang decreed the mobilization of 200,000 troops, deployed soldiers from Luoyang to Chengdu. But here's the thing: no army actually arrived. Food was short, orders were forged. Local officials kept their soldiers back to protect internal warehouses. One battalion reached Ling, but all soldiers sold their weapons for sticky rice cakes. Generals grew resentful. Some switched sides. Wang Mang wrote a 3,000-character letter urging the troops to stay loyal, but no one responded because it was sent using the new currency delivery system and no one accepted it. In the year 23, the Chime attacked Chang'an. The city didn't resist. The people opened the gates. The soldiers threw down their swords. The magistrates ran home. Wang Mang barricaded himself in the Jade Hall Palace, still wore white silk, still read the Book of Songs in the morning, still signed decrees, but there was no one left to deliver them. When Chime soldiers stormed in, he was killed by a former palace pantry cook. One strike, no cheers, no drums. Only the silence of an empire no one was listening to anymore. Wang Mang didn't die from lack of talent, didn't die from malice. He died because he forgot to invite the voiceless into his dream. You can write poetry, you can write laws, you can recreate the cosmos with knife coins, shell coins, round coins. But if the farmer doesn't understand, the melon seller doesn't use them, the mother can't survive, then your dream is something only you believe in. And at that point, war doesn't need a king. It only needs people with nothing left to lose. There was no triumphant anthem when the Qin dynasty ended. No chronicler waited at the city gate to write a farewell line. Only dust on the road, blood soaked into coarse cloth, and a silence so long, no one bothered to call it an ending. Because honestly, it had already died before Wang Mang fell. On the final day, Wang Mang was still in the Jade Hall Palace, still wearing his ceremonial robes, still reading the Book of Documents. The palace maids had fled the night before. The old eunuch pretended to be deaf. The man lighting the lamps had fallen asleep on the floor. A summons was signed in blood and sent to the 4 city gates. But the messenger was stopped midway by commoners and traded for a handful of rice. That dynasty didn't need to be conquered. It dissolved on its own like salt in cold water. When the red eyebrows entered, no barricades were raised, no trenches, no cannons, only townspeople standing by the roadside, not joyous, not afraid. They had once believed, then starved, then fallen silent, and now they simply watched the world collapse like a dying oil lamp. Wang Mang died. No statue was raised, no posthumous title, no overthrow, because there was nothing left to overthrow. In year 24, Emperor Guangwu of Han ascended, restoring the Han dynasty. But the people didn't celebrate. No one believed in the word restoration. They just wanted peace, just wanted currency that didn't change its face every month, just wanted taxes not to rise during droughts, just wanted to farm without reciting the Book of Songs. The Qin dynasty, therefore, had no tomb. It was buried under broken bricks of Chang'an, under the black money melting pots of the rebels, under the scorched marks of law boards half burned. No one wanted to build a tombstone for a dream divorced from reality, because it had never truly lived among the people. Women stayed silent. Those who once had beautiful handwriting learned to fill out tax forms. The soldier who once starved was still a soldier, but now he asked to be paid in rice. Not morality, and in many hearts, one question lingered. If a dynasty is built on ideals but ignores hunger, is it any different from a palace without a foundation? No one answered. Only the seasons of ploughing went on fields. No longer burned tax ledgers, and children grew up with no one telling them about Wang Mang. The Qin dynasty had no funeral, no eulogy, no farewell. Only a long, drawn-out sigh drifting over each collapsed rooftop, a sigh that, if you listen closely, wasn't exactly regret, but a quiet reminder. Don't build a dream alone. If you don't invite the people to dream with you, a dynasty can fall in a battle, but reforms die more slowly. They leave scratches on how people think about money, laws, power, and trust. They cling to the memory of survivors, like the burnt smell on clothes after a market fire. After Wang Mang, no one dared issue a currency reform for the next 50 years. Silver fabric rice returned as the primary means of exchange. People didn't trust money, and No one blamed them. The merchants, once accused of rebellion for rejecting the new currency, many quit, turned to farming. Some left the cities for good. They understood one thing: if every coin is a moral command, no one dares do business. After Xin laws were shortened, no more ornate rhyming prose, no more book of documents quotes. Only, who steals, beheaded. Who evades tax, fined double. Short, clear, easy to remember, and painful. People stopped hoping that laws could teach ethics. They only wished not to die unjustly. The rules of 3 obediences and 4 virtues. Of ranking female virtue, thought to be a return to tradition, were in truth a regression. Women after Xin no longer wrote poetry, no longer held local ceremonial roles. Many villages banned girls from learning to write, because education leads to rebellion. The result of turning morality into regulation is that everyone different becomes a threat. Chang'an, after being rebuilt under Eastern Han, kept its old architecture, but no one wanted to live near the imperial district. The people moved to the outskirts. No songs echoed in the streets at night. Tea shops hung signs. No discussion of court affairs. Walls were rebuilt, but trust wasn't. No one built a statue of him. No one recited his poems. No one mentioned his name when speaking of reform, because that name carried the memory of a time when money changed without warning. Laws were written without meaning. People were taught morality while starving. And a dream was built only for the emperor and scholars, not the people. No one hated the Xin dynasty. They just preferred not to bring it up. Like a nightmare that, upon waking, you only want to drink water, not recall every detail. The reforms of the Xin dynasty left one simple reminder: if you want to change the world, invite the people in from page 1. If not, they'll burn the book.